This is Book TV's Afterwards. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, this week we're reaching back into the Book TV archives. This week our guest is former FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He talked about his career, the FBI, and his firing from the Bureau. He was interviewed by New York Times reporter Adam Goldman, Pulitzer Prize winner for investigative reporting.
Hi, I'm Adam Goldman. I'm a reporter with the New York Times.
Good to see you, Adam.
Thanks. Thanks for being here. We know a lot about you. You've been on a book tour, or some of your critics might say a redemption tour, and we know a fair amount about you. That you were in the FBI for what, close to 20 years?
21 years.
And you held a whole bunch of different positions. You tackled Russian organized crime in New York. You did terrorism in 2006, and you rose to the highest ranks of the Bureau, to the deputy director.
That's right.
Until you were fired by Attorney General Jeff Sessions for what they say was what the Inspector General says was a lack of candor in interviews.
That's correct.
In a report. Much has been talked about in terms of this book. You've done a lot of interviews, so I thought I'd take a shot at maybe asking some new questions.
Sure.
Before we get into the meat of this book, I guess I had a question about writing, because I do a lot of writing. Sometimes I do it every day. Mm-hmm. I wonder, how long did it take you to write this book? And, what was the process like? Because you're obviously a first-time author. Mm-hmm. You clearly wrote a lot of FBI interview memos known as the 302, but this is something a little different. This process is a little different. So walk me through how you actually tackled this particular project.
Yeah, so basically crashed on this project and did nothing but this for many, many months last summer. So shortly after my firing, I started thinking about how to best kind of balance and understand and talk about my entire experience in the FBI. I was really concerned by what I'd felt were the kind of corrosive impact that these false narratives about the FBI, the corrosive impact that those narratives are having on the people of the FBI and their ability to do their work. And I felt like if people understood really more about the organization, who we are, how we work, what kind of people are drawn to the FBI, and most importantly, how we make the decisions we do, that they're based on specific legal authorities and priorities and policies given to us by the Department of Justice, not based on politics and personal preference, that sort of thing. So that was really kind of the impulse that brought me to the project. After kind of securing the support of course, St. Martin's Press, who's published the book, and they've been great, I started working with a team, a co-author and an editor who I worked very closely with on the project. So literally, we spent the entire summer every day together, either in my house or in a house he was staying. He had moved to for the summer and lived nearby, shoulder to shoulder, sitting at the dining room table with each of us had a couple of laptops out, and we spent the entire summer doing it, researching, talking, writing, editing, handing different pieces, different sections, different building blocks back and forth.
Were you able to actually go back into the FBI and review any of your notes or any of your materials you had left behind, or were you basically having to reconstruct this from memory and obviously from newspaper articles and books that had been written on subjects you were writing about?
So I had no access to any of my materials from my time at the FBI. All of my notes and memos and all that stuff remains in the custody of the FBI. So it was really from memory. But there is, as you know, a lot of it due to your own work and your paper's work, there's an incredibly robust factual record available in open source and publicly available material. And so we spent a lot of time reading some of that as well. But yeah, it was a real process.
Because of the sensitivities of some of the information that you were exposed to or you handled at the FBI, did you make a decision while writing this book you weren't going to include it in it, and why?
Oh, I absolutely made decisions to avoid talking about things, certainly anything that's classified. So I tried to refer only to those things that I could source to open source materials. And beyond just classified, we are concerned at the FBI about what we would call sensitive information, right? So something from a criminal case, for example. It may not be classified, the name and identity of an informant or a source, but it's highly sensitive. We would never want to talk about that person in a way that identifies them and could put them in danger or jeopardize their their relatives and their families. So I definitely made a concerted effort to avoid putting material like that in the book. And then, of course, I went through an extensive process with the FBI, which they call pre-publication review. We went over everything that's in the book and went through kind of a robust exchange about what I could include and what they wanted me to take out.
Did they push back on publicly an open source material, things that appear in the Washington Post or the New York Times?
The way the process works is they take an initial review of the manuscript and they highlight everything that they think is sensitive or classified, and they send that back to you and say, we think that you should consider redacting these things. And then you have the opportunity to go back and say, well, this paragraph that you've redacted on page 25, here's where you can see this has been publicly acknowledged by some government official or some element of the government and published in open source material. And once they see that proof, those indications, they'll retract their request that be redacted. So that went on for literally 4 months.
Let's jump right into the book. About midway through the book, you write that, quote, as a matter of policy, the FBI does everything possible not to influence elections. In 2016, it seems we did. It seems for an FBI agent, a former FBI agent, you seem to be having a moment of reflection. I'm not sure I actually encounter that too much from FBI agents. This almost sounds like a regret, an acknowledgement that the FBI, really screwed the pooch at the end, and we are here now because of what happened then. What's your thought about it? Is that what you were? Is regret too strong for you? Because how would you describe that?
Maybe screw the pooch is a little too strong for me. But no, I think you're definitely onto something there. I did spend a lot of time thinking about the decisions we'd made and the reasons behind those decisions and how we thought about those issues at the time. And with the benefit of hindsight, I tried to be honest in my own reassessment of, did we get it right or did we not? The two biggest issues there are, of course, Jim Comey's announcement in July about our conclusion of the case in a very public way that departed from precedent. And then, of course, Jim's decision in October to notify Congress about the reopening of the case because of the emails on the Wiener laptop. I very much agreed with Jim's decision to announce the case as we did in July. In retrospect, I think that we probably got that wrong. I think that we underestimated how hard it would be to convince people of just how good of an investigation we had done and how our conclusion was the independent and correct and fair result. I still believe all those things, but I think we underestimated how deeply people would cling to their political perspectives rather than listening to us with an objective ear. And I think we all were overconfident in Jim's ability to convince people that we had done a good job. And I blame myself for that miscalculation. I go through a few paragraphs in the book where I talk about, like, should I have known better? From my own experiences on the Hill, from the scars of enduring the multiple Benghazi reviews and all those, those forays into investigations that were charged politically. Should I have concluded that this is not possible for us to really convince anyone that this is the right result here? Should we have just been quiet, reported our findings to the department, and let the department kind of step in front of the guns and take that hit? So that's kind of how I look at that in retrospect.
It's interesting because in the book you mention an agent named Adam Lee, and he was the former special agent in charge, the top agent in Richmond, Virginia, who recently retired. And and you think about somebody like Adam Lee's experience. He's a career public corruption investigator, right?
Sure.
And those people understand. People who do public corruption for a living, whether the agents or the prosecutors, understand do nothing to upset an election. And I guess it had me thinking, you think the Bureau would benefit more by having more people like Adam Lee, more people exposed to public corruption, more people doing politically sensitive investigations on the 7th floor? I mean, we know post 9/11, the Bureau is very terrorism heavy, right?
Sure.
You look at people, you talk about your experiences in ITOS, International Terrorism Operations Section. Those people have risen to the top of the Bureau. But do you think now, in retrospect, the Bureau needs to sort of look at the way and the people it puts on the 7th floor, because there is more varied experience in terms of people who've handled these political sensitive cases? Because now we've seen these cases are the kryptonite to the Bureau. Now you've known that, and the Bureau has always known that, but it seems like the Bureau sort of forgot that for a period of time.
Well, look, you raise a great point. And is it ideal to have that sort of diverse experience, all the broad spectrum of diverse experience in the Bureau represented across the 7th floor at all times? Absolutely. That's what we would prefer to have. But like every institution, when those critical moments come and you're selecting, the next EAD for national security or the next I'm sorry, I'm using acronyms here. Right. The next executive assistant director for, the criminal side of the house. You are not there. There's always, by definition, a fairly limited pool of people who have had the requisite experience, time in, perspectives, abilities to serve in those roles. And so, like every organization, you try to make the best decisions at the time with the people that you have before you. Should the same sort of emphasis be put on kind of expertise in navigating politically sensitive matters? I mean, it's certainly something that probably Director Wray and the other leadership on the 7th floor are thinking about in maybe a different way than we did, a few years ago.
What's your opinion? Speaking of Wray, what's your opinion of Wray? I know he wanted you. You write in the book that he wanted you to step down under circumstances you didn't believe were quite accurate. Walk me through a little bit. Was this face-to-face? Was this on the phone?
So, I have some, of course, disagreements with Director Wray over how I left the Bureau, and I probably should leave that at that for now because of the ongoing matters that continue, the investigations that spun from the IG report, my own civil suit that I'll be bringing in the next couple of weeks. But I did have the opportunity to work with Director Wray for several months before I left. I find him to be, he's a very smart guy. He's a hardworking guy. I think he's committed to the FBI and to making the FBI as strong and effective as he possibly can. He has a very different approach to leadership, I think, than I do, certainly than Jim Comey did. And so, look, I hope that he is successful. And as a former FBI agent, you want the organization to be in good hands, and no reason to believe they're not.
Former FBI agents have put it this way, that Mueller didn't talk enough, Comey talked too much. And Director Wray's got to find himself somewhere in the middle in these politically perilous times.
I think that's accurate. I think he needs to find that balance. I'm not sure that he's found it yet, but he's only been on the job for about a year, so we'll see how that goes.
In a chapter titled Enterprise Theory, you mention informants. It seems like a reference to Chris Steele, the former MI6 officer who worked with the FBI, and perhaps another informant whose identity was later leaked along with Chris Steele. A few things. You seem to take a shot at Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, in this chapter. You say, quote, "Not giving up your people, this is important," end quote. It sounds like you're angry that Steele's name leaked and certain information about ongoing investigations was provided to Congress. Talk a little bit more fully about what that means and
Sure.
what exactly you're getting at there. in
Yeah.
terms of providing information to Congress, which has a legitimate oversight function.
Of course they do. And look, the FBI needs oversight. We need oversight from the department. We need oversight from the Hill. We need oversight from places that aren't the FBI, right? I don't think anybody would dispute that. But in the wake of the conclusion of the Clinton email case, we received an overwhelming number of requests from the Hill. They were the most kind of invasive and comprehensive requests for not just our conclusions, not even just our investigative reports.
This is before Rod. This is before Rod comes
That's right.
on.
But really, this is the beginning of that process, right? So the next thing you know...
So summer of 16.
That's right. Summer of 16, fall of 16, into the end of 16, beginning of 17, and it really continued and built all through 2017. We were struggling to comply with these incredibly expansive requests we had gotten from the Hill, and a very granular information, raw investigative information, the types of things that are not normally provided, not normally shared outside the organization, outside the FBI, for very good reasons, to protect people's identities, the identities of employees, of sources, all sorts of things like that. The Department of Justice took a very expansive view, an unprecedented view of what we should be turning over to Congress. And certainly the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, was central to those decisions.
Why do you think Rod did that? Why did they, the FISA applications were originally given to Senator Grassley and Senator Feinstein early in 17, but that was to get Rod. That was to condition to get Rod Rosenstein confirmed. It's our understanding.
That's correct.
So that wall comes down there. Why do you think Rod relented going forward in providing Congress this granular information on informants and other issues?
I can't put myself in Rod's shoes. I can't tell you what he was thinking. I can tell you that we were all under an enormous amount of pressure from the Hill, pressure that was politically motivated and intended for political results. And so we found ourselves handing over information that we don't normally share, and it was something that caused many of us great concern, but it continued and increased during that period of time that I've identified for you. So you end up with, in a very public fight over things like, are we going to protect the actual identity of an informant or a source in an important and ongoing matter?
Adam Schiff, who's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, has weighed in on this issue.
Okay.
For 2 years, I sounded the alarm about DOJ's deviation from just that principle, as it turned over hundreds of thousands of pages in closed or ongoing investigations. I warned that DOJ would need to live by this precedent, and it will. He's referring to the Mueller report.
That's right.
Do you think DOJ now has a legitimate argument to withhold the Mueller report from Congress?
I think that Representative Schiff is exactly right. This is exactly the scenario that we worried about at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017. Some of us in the FBI were arguing strenuously over this exact fact. Like, if we do this now, we'll never be able to walk this dog back. You can't wean Congress off of this sort of response. And I think that the department is going to have a tough time justifying doing anything different in this case.
We talked briefly about some of the things you didn't include in your book, mainly the Rod's reference to, using the 25th Amendment to get remove the president from office, and also a comment he made in 2 meetings on May 16th, 2017 about, wearing a wire. But, one thing you don't write about, and I believe you, in fact, signed it at one point, was the Carter Page FISA application. We've had a memo on that, and much of that has been made public. I guess 2 questions. Why didn't you get at that in your book? And 2, you signed this, right? You put your name on this thing. And there's been a dispute about how much of the Chris Steele dossier, right, the information that this ex-MI6 informant generated and provided to the FBI that contributed to this investigation. So those are my 2. So how much of the Steele actually contributed to the FISA application. And in your opinion, do you think that got it over the hump? Because there are line people at the National Security Law Branch at the FBI who handle these FISAs, including the line supervisor who believed that they didn't need this dossier to get over the hump. And do you think that you adequately informed the court about the origins of the FISA, the origins of the Steele dossier?
Yep.
And do you think Stu Evans, who's the chief of the intelligence officer, when he took it to the court, was fully informed?
I do. I do believe that we adequately notified the FISA court of the information we were using and what we thought about that information. I think in fact, in my experience with FISA packages, I've never seen a footnote like the one we included in that package specifically for that purpose.
This is like on page 16
it's
or 8?
About a page and a half long.
Footnote, right.
Footnote itself. It goes into great detail about our previous relationship, what we thought of the information we were getting from him, and kind of how we understood his involvement or interest in this stuff that was in the FISA package. So I do think we represented it adequately. I know that's a matter that's currently under investigation. Be anxious to see what they have to say about it.
Well, the buck stops with the chief of intelligence at the Department of Justice. That's the penultimate person, right? Mm-hmm. Stu Evans.
That's right.
In your conversations with Stu, did the Justice Department, did that office, you reached an accommodation with him, right, in terms of transparency, right?
Well, I'm not going to go into the details of the conversations I had with Stu. But at the end of the day, we put forth a package that, to my understanding, people in my building and the department were satisfied with. So to the extent that there were any concerns about how we represented what we knew about the informant and his potential, how he came involved in acquiring this information and what his background might say about his involvement in that collection, I think everyone was satisfied that we had represented that accurately and adequately in the package. The court was obviously satisfied. They signed it, 3 or 4 times?
But there was one, right, there were 3 renewals, including by Rod, the last one.
That's right.
In
the
May
initiation and 3 renewals, one of which I signed. It took place after the director had been fired.
And when you signed that FISA application, how extensive was your vetting? I mean, clearly you were involved in a lot of the conversations that were taking place. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are text messages, I believe, between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok that talk about pushing this thing through. Right. You guys had a lot of concerns. Why did you think there was urgency to push this thing through on October, 21st, 2000? What was the urgency there?
You know, there's always an urgency about getting surveillance in place. You're conducting an investigation. You have probable cause to believe someone's an agent of a foreign power, which that was our feeling at the time, and the court obviously validated that assessment. So you want to get, surveillance, electronic surveillance is not like a lazy, we'll get to it when we get to it thing. You do it because you think you need it then. So this was an approach that we felt was necessary and important to move the case forward.
Do you find it extraordinary that you're talking about electronic surveillance on an American citizen in public?
It is it's unbelievable to me. And we're talking about it, of course, because, as I'm sure the viewers understand, the entire package itself is publicly available. You can go online and read it in a redacted version for yourself, which that alone is just so unprecedented. I've been involved with and connected to and then ultimately signed many, many FISA packages over the last 12 or so years. And we just do not talk about these things outside the organization. I think it's a sign of the incredibly fraught times we're trying to navigate right now over these issues.
Let's move on here. In the days after Comey was fired on May 9th, 2017, this firing itself triggered a firestorm. You opened up on the investigation, the obstruction case, and a counterintelligence case. Mm-hmm. You did this within the FBI, and you wanted to lock this case down. But now we know, and I think you've said this, maybe not so explicitly. You didn't go to the DAG for approval. You had the authority to do it yourself within the FBI. Why not go to the DAG and get cover?
the requirement when you open an investigation like this, which would be classified as what we call a sensitive investigative matter.
A SIM. Right.
That's right. Is that you notify the Department of Justice at a very high level within 15 days. And I, of course, did that. Rod and I discussed this as I was thinking about it. I informed Rod that we had taken the step, that the cases were now open. So DOJ had almost instantaneous notice, not like we sat around for 15 days. And
that's what you didn't want to do. You didn't want to sit around and talk about this. You wanted to open this. You thought it needed to be open.
I felt like we needed to move quickly. And again, I'm pretty clear about it in the book. My concern was that I probably would not be around for very long. And I felt very strongly that the investigation needed to be on as solid a footing as it could possibly be, because I really didn't know who'd be sitting in my chair the next day.
This is a pretty chaotic period.
Yes,
that you write about in the book, and I think there was a lot of confusion, and I think one of the things we've thought about as reporters is if the president is investigating. I mean, if Mueller is investigating the president for possibly obstructing justice, and the reason you opened on him for obstruction was the firing of Jim Comey. How's Rod not recuse himself? And did Rod ever suggest you recuse yourself?
So you've asked a great question about Rod. That is a question that only Rod can answer, right? The recusal decision is one that the official has to make, and hopefully it's done on the basis of consultation and following the guidance of ethics officials. I've had a number of those issues of my own to navigate, and I did so in a very clear and transparent way. So I don't know. I don't know why he's made the decision he did.
Did he ever suggest that you should recuse yourself?
He, in one instance, raised the issue with me, and it was based on the infamous photograph, a family photograph that I took during my wife's campaign in 2015 while we were at a swim meet with my kids, and we all happened to be wearing shirts from my wife's campaign. The four of us had matching shirts in one of those really goofy family pictures. So he showed me the picture.
You weren't campaigning. That was at a swim meet.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't get involved in any campaigning or canvassing, or I played no role in the campaign whatsoever. Of course, there is the Hatch Act, which lays out very explicit rules about what you can and can't do as the spouse of a political candidate if you're a government official. I got advice on how to ensure that I didn't run afoul of the Hatch Act, and I followed that advice very carefully. The Hatch Act does not say that you can't wear a button or a T-shirt at some point in your private life when you're not at work. So it really was a non-issue. Unfortunately, it kept coming up.
Yes, it kept coming up, and I think now, obviously, you have the benefit of hindsight. And I think, I believe the IG found that you handled the initial recusal properly, right?
That's correct.
Didn't find anything wrong with that, the recusal and the way you handled it.
That's correct.
I guess if you could go back in time, Andy, if you could go back in time, would you, if you had known that your wife's run for office in the Virginia State Legislature was going to happen, and the Republicans were going to weaponize that, would you have recused yourself from Hillary going forward?
No. My decision about the recusal in the case, which of course came very late in the case and was at Jim's request. You
realize that had a bad look to it. If you were going to recuse, you should have done it sooner. Doing it at the end just made it look bad.
So, Adam, my own ethics officers and now the IG have all agreed that there was no reason to recuse from the Clinton case, which I wasn't involved in until 3 months after my wife's campaign had failed and was in the past. So, no, I don't think I navigated that issue incorrectly, and I think that my position on that has been validated by those who've reviewed it. And I think it's really important as we raise this again.
But are you angry at Jim Comey for making you recuse at the end?
I disagreed very strongly with Jim's request. I made that known to him. He felt it was important to do. It wasn't illegal or immoral, and so I followed the director's direction. But I will say, Adam, it's important for me to get this out. This entire idea that I was somehow compromised in my approach to the investigation because of the support that my wife had received from someone else a year earlier is a false narrative. This is a lie that's been perpetrated for political purposes. So should I have made decisions differently in my professional life, anticipating that people are likely to lie about this later? That's not the standard for recusal.
Well, I've recently told reporters we don't predict the future. So, but it's clear that it's clear that period in time, now with your wife running for a political office and the money she took, that the optics of that haunted you. And they came back to...
Sure. The optics of that haunted me because it was created as in the political warfare that was going on at the time. You can't possibly sit here today and say, should I make a decision about something that's happening today on the off chance that someone might lie about it a year and a half from now for politics? I mean, that's a ridiculous proposition.
Let's switch gears for a second.
Sure.
And move to one of my favorite subjects, Gitmo. And military commissions and Article III courts. You talk about a detainee. I believe I've written about this detainee on page 121. And Sessions, the former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, refused to bring back to New York to face. He didn't want to prosecute this guy in federal court in New York. And this guy had been sitting detained by a foreign partner in a country, we'll call it the Middle East, right? And I guess there are 2 points here. You put a lot of blame on Sessions, right? And you go after Sessions in the book, but internally from your organization, there's a lot of criticism directed at you and some anger that this guy was picked up in the fall of 2015. Everybody knew where Jeff Sessions stood on this issue. The Attorney General of the United States didn't believe you should prosecute terrorists in Article III courts. His position had been known. How come you didn't push that through sooner? I mean, this was an important case. He could have been an important AQ cooperator, right? New York wanted him, right? It's a great terrorism case. I mean, why not bring him back sooner and get this done before Sessions or his team, which have been crying about Gitmo, get a chance to handle this?
Okay, so a couple things.
Yeah.
First, for the record, I am not going to confirm who this detainee
That's
was.
fine.
I'm going to respect the restrictions that the FBI
Just
has placed
respect my
upon
reporting.
Me. So, what I will say on this is from your extensive reporting on these topics generally, these are unbelievably complicated and fraught issues, bringing people back here to face charges for their terrorist activity overseas, whether they're Americans or not U.S. citizens. There are 1,000 places along that path where these efforts can get hung up, they can get delayed, they can die completely. There are diplomatic issues, there's of course legal issues, and there's our own internal policy debates about who thinks we should be, bringing terrorists back to the United States for criminal prosecution or not. So if I am correct in assuming the matter that you're referring to, it is one that suffered from a number of those issues, right? These things don't happen quickly.
Were you distracted, you think, too, a little bit?
No.
Okay.
There was a lot of robust conversation around this very topic. And I can certainly understand how people, listen, the guys on the ground, the agents in the field who this is the thing that they are working on. They want this to happen sooner rather than later. They have a single-minded focus on getting it done, and thank God they do. That's how things get done in this organization. They are routinely frustrated and confounded by what they perceive from the field to be, typical bureaucracy, nonsense, politics, whatever that's getting in the way of the result that they want. It's often a much more complicated answer than just that. I think people made a lot of efforts to get this done. We were not successful in doing it before the new administration came in. But, you shouldn't have to think that with the turnover of an administration that a process that we've been using effectively for so many years is automatically going to be thrown out the window.
Was it thrown out the window? Was that it, essentially?
There is no doubt the Attorney General brought a very strong opinion about these matters with him into the job based on, I think, a preconceived kind of understanding about the work that we do is I think, dated in his
Why
approach.
did they? Well, that raises a question. Why did Sessions agree to bring back? I don't know. I think you were still at the FBI. You brought back a terrorist from Spain. He had like Irish roots. Remember, he was extradited to Philadelphia. Does this ring a bell?
It's kind of crossing wires on a number of different guys for me. But
We'll go back to this detainee for a second and Gitmo in general. How eager was Sessions? How eager was he to bring somebody to Gitmo? Were they looking at every opportunity? Did they want to give this victory to Trump because he had mouthed off about it on the campaign?
I don't know that it ever got to a really well-baked plan to send any individual to Gitmo. I think there was a lot of talk about it on the campaign. There's no question that Sessions, that's kind of his preference. It has been for many years. I think it's another one of those issues that they talked about a lot on the campaign, not understanding the challenges they would have once they were finally in those seats trying to get it done. The legislative obstacles to bringing anybody there, the problems in trying to bring those in Gitmo here, funding for detention facilities that might serve that purpose in the United States has been blocked for many years legislatively. So I just think they underestimated what they were dealing with.
What was DOD's position on this? What was Mattis? We were always told Mattis was opposed to it. He didn't want to repopulate the Gitmo.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't tell you clearly, Adam. I don't remember exactly where he was on it.
Okay. Let's move on to back to the Russia investigation, which people seem to be fascinated with. Known as Crossfire Hurricane, an ode to the Rolling Stones.
Which I can neither confirm nor deny.
No, it's not in the book, but it's among FBI officials is known as CH. I got a question about this. Like I said, let's back up a second. You were in this extraordinary period. The directors fired in May of 2017. I mean, people, it's chaotic. People are under an enormous amount of stress. Look, I know you had lived through some pretty high-profile events. Benghazi.
Sure.
I would argue the Boston bombing probably surpassed that.
Sure.
In terms of stress and what you were dealing with, perpetrators trying to find them, prevent more casualties. It was a horrific event. Do you think in this moment of time when you guys were rushing to open up on the president to lock in this investigation based on everything you had seen, which is it's in some ways an outgrowth of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, do you think you panicked? Do you think you panicked an opening? Do you think cooler heads might have prevailed? Do you think, did you really think that the Department of Justice was going to stop this investigation? I mean, you can take away the prosecutors, but the files always live in the FBI, and you're not going to expunge information. Do you think you panicked in this moment, this extraordinary moment? Yeah. Granted that you had never seen before, that the people around you had never seen before. Mm-hmm. I don't think the country has ever seen before.
Yeah. It's a great question, and my honest answer to it is no. I don't think I panicked. I don't think we panicked. Panic is not really, thank God, is not really how I react to things. And partially because of those experiences that you just referred to, the Boston bombing, numerous terrorist events, mass shooting events. I mean, we unfortunately have a lot of experience navigating challenging facts and under emotional and pressure-filled circumstances. This one was totally different. I get that. But at that time, you fall back on what you know. And my first instinct was, let's go to the investigators, let's pull the team together and ask them, are we in the right place right now with respect to this investigation? There were investigations that we were thinking about closing at that time. Should we close those? Are there other investigations out there that we think we need to get started? And should we start those before? Who knows what happens? I might be gone next week. We all might be reassigned. If this is an actual effort, if the firing of the director was the first step in an effort to throw a wet blanket on an investigative effort that we all believed was valid and necessary, then we should try to put it on the stablest foundation possible. I'm not going to tell you that we knew where it would go. We just knew that it needed to be done. Like that's the question for us in that moment. Is there investigation here that needs to happen? And our answer was yes.
Your answer was yes, but you're a smart guy. You understood the consequences of that, which we're probably going to upend the country, which is already upended. We're going to upend it again. Did that occur to you, or that wasn't?
I mean, I knew there would be. I knew there would be incredible impact from our decisions on me personally, on the country writ large. But again, Adam, I would say, look, we're in these jobs because we took an oath to defend this nation. Our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. The facts in our hands created a clearly articulable basis to believe that a crime might have been committed or a threat to national security might exist. It was to not have made that decision, to start this investigation at that time would have been abandoning our duty.
There are people out there, maybe they haven't read the DIOG, the Domestic Investigations Operations Guide, which is
it's thrilling.
It's thrilling. It's online. You can get it at FBI.gov, and it's the pathway to understanding how the FBI conducts investigations and what the necessary predicate to open one.
That's right.
Your predicate to open this investigation on the president, as you said, you just have to be able to reasonably articulate it, right?
That's correct.
Facts.
Right.
Your critics have said, he gets on TV and he tells Lester Holt it was Russia, and you had these other, you had this mosaic of information. Mm-hmm. They're scoffing at that because it's quote unquote not evidence. What's the difference in your mind between what people like Mark Meadows, right, and others who have said, well, there's no evidence here, right? Your critics have said there's no evidence. There was no evidence to open this investigation, yet you had a set of facts that allowed you, according to your own guidelines. What's the divide there? Can you explain that a little bit?
It's kind of surprising to me, and I think that Representative Meadows has some prosecutorial experience in his background. So to hear that from a former prosecutor, there's an embedded assumption in that criticism, like unless we had to serve a warrant to get it, or we got it through some sort of covert or classified means from a foreign partner or something, it doesn't actually count as evidence. That's simply false. Sometimes you have to just look at the facts that are abundantly clear in front of you and make a decision based on those facts.
Right, and not a crime, and you don't have to necessarily, I think what he's alluding to and others alluding, you didn't have evidence of a crime per se.
No. You don't need evidence of a crime. Right. You need an articulable factual basis to believe that a crime might have been committed. It is a standard far lower than probable cause or proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just to say, like, this is the initiation of an investigative effort. We're not convicting anyone with that decision. We're not throwing anybody in jail because we've opened a case on them. We're not indicting anybody. We're simply stating that with the facts we have, we now have an obligation to go forward and investigate. That's what the FBI should be doing, right? There's been a lot of talk lately about, shouldn't it be different because it's the President of the United States, or shouldn't you have stepped back and thought about it differently and been more careful? No, the FBI needs a clear and consistent standard to apply to everyone. Those sorts of qualitative decisions should be made at the Department of Justice. The FBI should investigate when we have facts that reach the declared threshold for an investigation, and we should refrain from doing so if we don't have those facts, period.
There were, on May 16th, 2017, there were basically two pivotal meetings, right? There was one in the morning, right. With, I believe, with you, Tosh, who is Rod's national security advisor, Rod Rosenstein's national security advisor, and his chief of staff, Jim Crowell. Mm-hmm. And then later, on the second day, there's a second meeting, right, with you, your lawyer, Lisa Page, that same group, plus Stu Goldberg and I believe Scott Schools. Who, in these two meetings, who else, obviously you write about pushing for the special counsel. You thought it was really important to get done. Mm-hmm. Who else was pushing for this special counsel among this select group of people who were privy to what was going on?
Yeah, so it's hard for me to go back and parse out. I won't parse out who exactly said what. But I was not the only voice in the room that felt very strongly that the special counsel needed to be appointed quickly. The one other kind of strong opinion in that direction that I remember is Jim Crowell, who was at the time, I think, serving as
Rod's chief of staff.
Rod's chief of staff.
Why did he think it needed to be done?
You know, again, Adam, in retrospect, it's hard for me to sort out or say like what he was thinking. But some of the things that we were talking about were we had a briefing in front of Congress coming up to update them on the status of the case and the steps that we had taken. Rod was totally supportive of that briefing and the decision to do it. He was very clear about wanting to do it with me, which I thought was the right thing to do. But I made it clear to him that, you know, if he sat in front of those representatives who were many people were calling for the appointment of a special counsel, and he needed to be able to say that he had done it or here's why he didn't. And if the answer was he hadn't done it yet and wasn't going to do it, you know, I told him I thought he was going to get a lot of pressure about that. And I remember Jim being kind of saying some of the same things.
We talked about earlier the fact that to placate Congress, you know, the FBI, DOJ handed over an enormous amount of material to legislators regarding ongoing investigations and closed investigations referring to Hillary Clinton. It seems like this was done, at least when Rod came into the job, to protect Rod's job, right? Give Congress what it needed, but also to protect Mueller, right? Because the fear was if Rod was fired, then Mueller would be exposed. That Rod was, you know, this buffer as the sole person who could fire Mueller since Sessions was recused. I don't know. Looking back on this, do you think was all of this worth it? I mean, you know, it seems like, you know, you gave away the farm to protect Mueller. What if I just said to you, so what? What if they had fired Mueller? So what? The FBI would have continued to investigate. Agents would have continued to investigate. Was all of this worth it to protect Mueller in the end? I mean, we don't have a final report, but boy, you know, it seems like DOJ gave away the farm to protect this guy.
So I will say you have found a question I have not been asked yet. That is definitely one I have not thought about. I don't know that I agree with the premise that all of that information had to be turned over to protect Mueller. Do I think it's worth it to protect Mueller? Absolutely.
Why? Why?
Because I think that these are matters that should be investigated. Right. Go back to May 10th when we started in our own minds contemplating this very issue. These are serious matters.
I think you actually did it, by the way, on May 15th, but I haven't nailed that down.
So we start talking with the team about what's your assessment on literally the day after Jim's fired, and then it plays out over the course of the next 7 or 8 days. These are serious matters that needed to be investigated. They couldn't reasonably be investigated by the FBI alone. We learned that through the Clinton email case, right? Had we had an independent counsel in the Clinton email case, things might have been very different in July and in October. So that was the problem I was trying to avoid. Part of my reason of telling Rod I thought he needed to appoint a special counsel. Once we got one, and we got the best one we could have gotten, I think it's important to allow that team to do its work and report its findings in a way that's independent and apolitical.
Was anybody making an argument against appointing a special counsel? You don't have to say names, but
yeah, no.
I mean, do you recall that?
I think the room, you know, there were definitely people in the room that weren't convinced that we needed to do it on the timeline that I was pushing for. I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I can't, there's a lot that was said and a lot that was unsaid, so it's possible, but I don't remember that.
What are you most proud of? If people think about Andrew G. McCabe, G-Man, what what's your legacy? Because you've got clearly, the bookend of this took a turn you didn't expect.
Of course,
what do you think your legacy is at the FBI?
Well, of course, I hope it's not that, right? I mean, to serve 21 years in the FBI and then to leave and be branded unfairly, I believe, as a liar is just it's sickening. I mean, it troubles me so deeply, even to this day. It never gets really any better. That bothers me, but ultimately I am confident in standing by the decisions I made and the things that I did. Completely fair for people to disagree with those decisions. If somebody wants to come in later and say, hey, you should have thought about it differently, or you're not very smart, or you made the wrong call here, that's fine. I mean, people are certainly entitled to those opinions. What I hope resonates out of the work that we all did, it wasn't just me, right? It was an entire team of people who worked incredibly hard on some unbelievably challenging things that people really hadn't thought about before. We tried to navigate those challenges with an eye on our role, our authorities, our mission. What are we supposed to do here? How do we protect the American people and uphold the Constitution? I think we made some very tough decisions under tough circumstances. Many of us have suffered greatly personally as a result of those decisions. I would do that. I would do it all again tomorrow. I really would. I think that I've said this in a couple of places, like if, as a deputy director of the FBI or acting director in any of those jobs, if you're not prepared to get fired for making the decision that you think is right, you should not be in that job. So, I wish it hadn't happened, but I'd make the same decisions again.
What do you think Mueller's legacy will be when this is over? And do you think Mueller is perturbed by Trump's Twitter attacks? Relentless Twitter attacks on the angry Democrats.
I think he probably laughs about them. I mean, this is a guy who gets perturbed if you wear a checkered shirt, so it's a hard one to judge. But he's not the kind of guy that takes this. He stays focused on what he's doing. He lets this noise play out around him, and he doesn't get involved in it.
Did you see? Is that the way he operated at the FBI?
Absolutely.
I mean, with all the political issues he faced, and the underwear bomber, how that was turned into political attacks on the left. You wanted to read a guy's rights. Did he just sort of tune all that out?
I mean, he's definitely aware of it, right? He monitors those things, but I think his preference, at least as I observed it, was for us to stay as far out of that fray as we could, and then we could continue doing our work as in as clean and purposeful a way as possible. What I learned in my own time was that, the Hill came to play such an active role in the work that we were doing, and we needed to be more interactive with particularly our overseers on the intel committees. We needed to be a little more proactive in sharing information about a national crisis or a mass shooting or something that just happened, how we were handling an attempted terrorist attack. And by being a little bit more transparent and open with what we were doing, we could build support on the Hill instead of constantly fighting our way out of a hole. So I think there's a balance there.
Sadly, I think the Bureau has regressed on that front. As a reporter covering the Bureau, I think we benefited some by that transparency and the FBI providing clear and accurate information after shootings and exposing us to leadership within the Bureau, whether it was in a gaggle or press.
Yep.
I think the Bureau has stuck its head in the sand at the moment, and maybe rightly so. Do you think that, speaking of Mueller, do you think Mueller will provide a lengthy report to the American people? I mean, well, obviously to the Department of Justice, or is he just taciturn and it's not his style? What do you envision? I know you're guessing at this point, but what do you envision?
Totally guessing. So I wait to see like everybody else does, but I think that he'll provide a robust, detailed report to the Attorney General. The idea that he would give the absolute minimal information required, like we recommend, charges against these people and none against these people, something like that, is just, I think, kind of silly after, 2 years worth of work.
Right. If he was going to recommend charges, he would have charged. Right?
Yeah, and I think he'll explain what he thinks about those people he investigated. Now, what we all ultimately see from a report like that is a much bigger question. The department has some tough decisions to make, and I think, as we've discussed, they've, to some extent, backed themselves into a corner, at least in terms of what they'll share with the Hill. I think, my own personal opinion, I think they should share very robustly with the Hill, and I think they should share with the American people as expansively as they can, acknowledging that there's all kinds of things that will mitigate against, there are going to be details that are classified or sensitive, there will be privileged material in there, things like that aren't appropriate to share. But I analogize it to the way that we handled the intelligence community assessment about, our report assessing the Russian meddling in the 2016 campaign. I mean, that document in its original form was one of the most highly classified, compartmentalized things that I've ever read. We were still able to come up with an unclassified version that we shared with the public that at least gave them our conclusions and the basis for those conclusions. So I'd like to see that here.
What's next? Typically, somebody retires from the FBI as a deputy director. You get a 7-figure job at some hedge fund. I'm not sure if that's going to happen now.
Yeah.
What is next? What do the next 12 months look like?
Yeah, I don't know. Been, as we said, really focused on the book and kind of getting the story out. It's important to me to be able to continue speaking about the FBI. I really think there's an education that needs to take place in this country. People don't understand, as much as people talk about the FBI constantly, It's kind of an icon in American life. They don't really know who we are and how we do the work we do. I think that will help. It'll help push back against many of these completely false narratives about FBI corruption and plotting coups and all the rest of that nonsense. So I hope to remain active in that conversation, and we'll see. Just taking it one day at a time.
You're under investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. is looking at whether you should be charged with in front of a grand jury and charged with 1001, lying to a federal investigator. This seems to be going on a long time. For a line to for a 1001 case, we're reaching a year on this thing. Yeah. Any sense of when there's going to be a conclusion?
I really don't. I agree with your assessment. It seems like it's been going on for a long time. We've had a number of exchanges my attorneys have with the prosecutor's office, and so we wait to see what happens.
You think the U.S. attorney's in a pickle?
It would seem they probably are. I don't know.
A declination could really anger the president.
There's all kinds of ways to speculate about that. Here's what I'll say. If they are guided by the law and the facts, which I give them the benefit of the doubt that that's how they'll make the decision, right. And if that is how they make the decision, I don't have anything to worry about. However, if their decision is impacted by politics, if it's impacted by, the president's tweets and pressure from who knows where, then nobody knows what will happen.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. It's great. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's Afterwards. Please rate and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts.